Well, it's so hard to believe that we are actually halfway through National Adoption Month. I think that this is a month that, for me, just last week, we celebrated 14 years that Amaya and Makai's adoption papers were signed. As a dad of five kids that we've adopted out of foster care, we actually do celebrate this day. And we celebrate adoption days. We celebrate gotcha days, as my kids love to call them as well. But you know what? We are so, so lucky to have our next guest. But before then, I want to say a big shout out because for the last 12 days, you all have taken the challenge to help my friend who's the chief analyst at CNN, Laura Coates. She also has the Laura Coates show on CNN at 11 o'clock at night, Eastern Standard Time. Laura came to me in October and was like, "Hey, Rob, let's do something together." As you all know, I was a CNN hero. I still love the fact that I get to keep in touch with my friends at CNN. And I said, "Let's do it." And she said, "Let's do Coates." Now, wouldn't she say that? Of course, because her name is Laura Coates. So she decided to do Coates for a Cause and Comfort Coates. And so we have been collecting coats now, and our goal is 300. I will have to tell you the big announcement was made that Elevance Healthcare out of Atlanta, they actually have donated 300 coats to us. So we have already hit our goal and more coats are coming in. So I want to say thank you so much to everyone who's donating. And by the way, you can go to comfortcases.org/Laura Coates. You can actually order coats there. We are limiting the coats, staying within the DC, Maryland, Virginia area this year. This is a pilot program for Laura and I, but we're hoping that really we're going to knock this out of the park and next year we'll go national. So without any further ado, the book is called Relinquish, The Politics of Adoption and the Privilege of American Motherhood. I will have to tell you, this book was not an easy book for me. And I cannot wait to start having an open conversation with the author. And so, as a father who was adopted, it really kind of there were moments that were raw. And I think that that's what she went for. So, without further ado, Gretchen, welcome to Fostering Change.
Hi, Rob. Thanks so much for having me.
I am so, so excited to have you. The fact is that I truly do believe that we do not talk about adoption enough. I think that adoption for so many years has been like the taboo thing. You put your kids up for adoption because you were a bad parent. You put your kids up for adoption because you had drug addiction. You put your kids up for adoption because you abused them. And those are all the stories of the reason our children arrive. But this book really opened my eyes that there's more reasons why people put their children up for adoption. So I want to dive right in and tell me, why did you decide to write the book?
Yeah. So I started doing this data collection for this book back in 2010. So well before I knew I was writing a book at the time. This was part of my doctoral dissertation work when I was finishing graduate school. And at the time, I was doing a lot of work with young mothers and seeing the ways that their parenthood was really stigmatized and marginalized in different ways, and the work that they had to do to get support to care for their children and raise their families the way that they wanted to, and just the unnecessary challenges that they faced in the pursuit of just trying to take care of their kids. And so I wanted to look more deeply at these broader narratives around who gets to be a parent in our society. And one thing that kind of kept coming up was the idea that for people whom we deem unworthy of parenthood, they should just be relinquishing their children, right? Adoption is the solution. If we just transfer their children to other families who have more money, might have more stability, probably a married couple, that is really the sort of social solution. Rather than investing in vulnerable families, adoption becomes the answer, in quotes,
Let me
right?
tell you something
And
right now.
and
You and I are so on the same page, okay? Because I am the very first one who says, and by the way, for all of those who are getting ready to send me those hate emails that you've been sending me for 6 seasons, not worry, my skin's tough. Foster care is not the answer. Putting a child up for adoption is not the answer. The answer is, how do we get into the family and make sure that the family is stabilized enough to be able to raise that child? And, when you make the comment about who's able to adopt, as well as I do, the majority of the people are white, privileged people. And we are adopting children of color. And by the way, I'm a dad of four kids of color, one son who's white. Two of my kids, I've repeated time and time again in many, many interviews across the country, they should have never actually been put up for adoption. They actually should have never gone into the system because I feel that if we as a community and as a society would have gone in and given the mother parenting classes, supported her, give her that extra bit of money that we keep giving foster parents, who, by the way, are total strangers, that would have given maybe her that more step to be able to keep her children instead of her children going into a system and then getting adopted out.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, my data collection, so my research is really on the private adoption system. So these were all mothers who terminated their own parental rights. So the state wasn't terminating their parental rights. There's a lot of interaction that happens between the public and the private adoption systems that I think we can talk about a little bit more. But these were all mothers that were relinquishing, I don't want to say of their own choice because I think their choices were constrained in a lot of really important ways that the book gets into, but they were not required to relinquish their children because because the child
Right.
welfare.
And I totally get that. And I
Yeah,
don't want
yeah,
people to think that
yeah,
when they read the book that it's, I can only go by what my experience was.
of
And
course.
the fact is that I see and I know lots and lots of people who have adopted through private adoption.
Yeah,
And the fact is that so many times I think about that mother who has made that choice. And by the way, I'm going to tell you something right now. I can't even imagine. It is the hardest choice that you could ever make in your life to give your child up to someone. And especially from so many stories that I've heard now that the kids are adults and they've gone back and met the birth parents, where the birth mom is like, I really didn't want to, but I felt like I had no other choice.
right, right. And that's really what I wanted to understand better is what are the circumstances that are leading women to relinquish their children? What does that look like? And what I found is that so many of the mothers today that are relinquishing are doing so because of poverty, because they don't have the resources to parent the way that they want to. And many of them are already raising children. So when we think of birth mothers, we usually, and historically this was true, it was a way of delaying parenthood. So it was a way of saying, right now I'm young, maybe unmarried, and I'm going to relinquish this baby and I'll mother later when, I'm in sort of whatever society has deemed a more appropriate circumstance. This is no longer what we're seeing among mothers today. It is more and more a reflection of lack of capacity. So they could already be raising children in their home, but they can't afford another child, and that's why they're relinquishing. When we looked at income, personal income, most of these mothers have less than $5,000 of annual personal income. A lot of them are experiencing chronic poverty, challenges like homelessness. We saw really high rates of public health insurance enrollment, which, as an indicator of where income is pretty reliable. It's also one of the data points that agencies collect most diligently because they want to be sure that the women that they're working with are getting prenatal care. So they're more likely to collect that than they are to collect income data. So that's a good marker. So we see that this is increasingly a function of financial or other capacity.
As we all know, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. And, do you feel that that has anything to do with it whatsoever? I mean, the fact is that, as a father, I have one daughter, four boys. It disgusts me for a man to make a decision on a woman's body. But I also think for so many reasons, abortion should not be used as, contraception. But do you think that we've turned a corner because of that, because of this being overturned?
Well, it's interesting. The question of like, well, what does adoption have to do with the Supreme Court's decision? And when you look at it in the context of women's lives and reproductive decision making, it doesn't really. But when you look at the Supreme Court's logic, it does because they said it did, right? Because the sort of the political rhetoric is always that adoption presents a meaningful alternative to abortion access, even if that's not what we see when we look at people who are seeking abortion care or when we look at mothers who are relinquishing their infants. So there was one survey of abortion patients that asked if they were interested in learning more about adoption. None of them said yes. Exactly 0% said they were interested in adoption. 1% said kind of. 99% said no, they were not interested. And so I think people who are seeking abortions are doing so because they do not want to be pregnant. To the point that when they are denied access to abortions, most of them are so uninterested in adoption that they're parenting. So when we looked at a sample of people who were going to get an abortion were turned away from care because of an abortion ban, a gestational limit at the time. 91% of them were parenting the children to whom they gave birth. Only 9% were returning to adoption in that circumstance. So when we talk about the impact that abortion bans are going to have on the number or which children are available for adoption, it's a far smaller number than most people expect because you're going to have far more people parenting in circumstances that they didn't choose and with timing they didn't choose, maybe with a partner that they didn't choose, as a result of being forced to continue a pregnancy. On the other hand, when I interviewed mothers who did relinquish their children and asked them about the circumstances of their pregnancy, what options they considered, most of them did not try to get an abortion. Most of them continued their pregnancies because they wanted to parent. That was their intention. And it wasn't until they came to a crisis later in the pregnancy, either an acute crisis or sort of the cumulative realization of the hardship and circumstances that they were in, that they turned to adoption as a lifeline. And so when you actually look at how women are making decisions about unplanned pregnancies or crisis pregnancies, you almost never find that women are choosing between abortion and adoption at one point in a pregnancy. If you take away abortion as adoption, more of them will turn to if you take away abortion as adoption, more of them will turn to adoption, but not nearly as many as you think. And when you talk about people who are looking at adoption, very few of them are considering abortion in the first place.
So, the research that I've done when it comes to private adoption, I find it too much of an industry that is making money on the backs of children and also making money on the backs of people that are, not able to be in a certain financial class. It's always the attorneys or the fertility places, or they're the ones making the big dollars. And I have, like I said, I have friends who have paid big money to adopt. Don't you also feel that, in a way that should be taken out of the equation? Because I see these mothers who are like, I'm going to get maybe 10,000, and it's like that 10,000 could change their life. And could have changed their life if they would have been able to keep their baby. But instead, they feel like, and to hear you say that they have other children and they have to choose this child because of financial means, I think the system shattered, my friend.
Oh, I mean, I would absolutely agree. And I think that the finances really provide a window into how broken this really is. Um, we have this idea, and, in sort of broader American culture, that we have so many babies waiting for adoption in the private system, that it's an altruistic and a net, we need more people who want to adopt in the private system. And of course, we don't really. We have far more people who are interested in adopting within the private adoption system than we have babies that are available. And so you have very high demand, relatively low supply, and you have all of these players, agencies, and most agencies are nonprofit, but not all. But even nonprofit agencies are working with attorneys, advertisers, for-profit brokers, even these website designers, search engine optimization services that are sold to prospective adoptive parents to market themselves and to find an expectant mother, right? All of this money is poured into this system to find babies that can be made available. And a lot of the mothers that I interviewed spoke about this really aggressive advertising and targeting, the geofencing that happens on their phones so that if they are seeking treatment at a public hospital, if they are getting addiction treatments at a methadone clinic, if they're visiting an abortion clinic while making a decision about a pregnancy, they start getting targeted advertising from adoption agencies that then follows them for a month on their phone to really present this idea of adoption as a solution. And to be clear, this is predatory of vulnerable pregnant women for sure, but it is also predatory for prospective adoptive parents who are pouring thousands and thousands of dollars into the hope of parenthood in a system that's fundamentally broken and isn't really about centering finding homes for children, but is about sourcing babies for parents or prospective parents who want them.
Yeah, everybody, let me tell you, the book is called Relinquish, The Politics of Adoption and the Privilege of American Motherhood. The fact is, it's National Adoption Awareness Month. It is a month that, I love talking about adoption. I will tell you, Gretchen, as a dad, I always wanted to be a dad, and I knew that being a dad wasn't going to be the traditional route my husband and I were going to be taken. And we thought about surrogacy and we thought about private adoption. But then I also realized that the 100,000 children that are sitting in foster care that are wanting a home, which, by the way, the average age is 5. But your book really opened up my eyes. And I think that more and more people need to read about this. And I think the reason that we need to read about this is because I think that if we educate our community about truly what is going on in the back door, we will start seeing more change. If there was anything that you could say to our viewers and listeners right now, that they grab this book, which, by the way, everybody, you're going to have a link here to be able to get the book. What do you hope their takeaway is?
I hope that everyone comes away from reading the book, from listening to this conversation with a renewed understanding of how we actually make adoption child-centered, right? And what it takes to think about how to care for children, and what it takes to care for families, to preserve families when that is the best solution, and how we can be creative in how we are finding support for families that are in crisis or that might be in a vulnerable place. Um, that should always be what's at the heart of adoption, what's at the heart of how we find care. And I think that the current way that it is practiced in the United States is so, so far from that.
Do you know of any other country that you feel is actually doing it right?
Well, that's a tricky question because the ways that most other countries find to care for children wouldn't effectively resemble the United States system, which requires permanent legal separation from a family of origin. But most other countries don't have systems that resemble our private adoption system. I think most other countries that have really robust social safety nets, you'll find that they have much less family separation in both private systems and in public systems of adoption.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Everybody, again, the book is Relinquish, The Politics of Adoption and the Privilege of American Motherhood. Gretchen, I will tell you, what an amazing conversation. This is my 6th season as my podcast. I tell my producers all the time, this is my last season, I'm done. And then I have somebody like you on who truly, I feel, has educated our viewers, our listeners. You definitely educated me. And I will tell everybody, go out, get this book. It's going to go on my favorite shelf. Anybody wants to borrow it, just, come on into my office, because it is definitely something that I think we all should be talking about. And Gretchen, thank you so much. Everybody, as I said, it is National Adoption Awareness Month. No matter where we're looking at, we need to be talking about how adoptions are done. We have to realize the fact is that whether you're doing a private adoption or a public adoption, we need to be more considerate about the children that we are adopting, and we need to be more considerate on the birth parents who we are adopting their children from. And I am very, very lucky that my husband and I have made the decision to have a contact with birth parents. And I think that that's something people should think about, because never forget, we all have a story. And until next time, this is Rob Scheer, and this is Fostering Change. Continue to be a good human. But what I'm absolutely loving about this month is that I'm actually partnering up with my amazing friends at Barely Canadian. Barely Canadian is a high quality design clothing company. They have everything you can imagine when it comes to clothes, hoodies, sweatshirts, polo shirts. You wait till you see it. I'm going to be doing a fashion show with all my Barely Canadian clothes. But what I love is that when you go on to Barely Canadian site and by the way, this is one of their shirts. I love the brightness of the colors. Everybody who knows me knows orange is my favorite color. So that's why my friend Kelly sent this to me. But guess what? When you go on and you buy any of their products, whether it's a t-shirt, whether it's a hoodie, whether it's, one of their long sleeve shirts, which is, by the way, they have a zip up hoodie that I love. The hoodie they have such a soft material. They are actually donating a Comfort XL. As I said, these are actually retailed for $148. This is a 32-inch duffel bag. So every single time you go onto their website for the month of November, we will actually they will purchase for us a Comfort XL. They'll be sent to us, and then we give them free to any child who's entering foster care. So, Barely Canadian, let's kick this off. And everybody, please do me a big favor. Go over and buy that sweatshirt, that hoodie, that jumper. I mean, yeah, they actually have jumpers as well. Do me a favor. Make a difference in a child's life in foster care.